Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. This episode is brought to you by Blue Book Services, and it's going to be a special episode with a guest from Blue Book. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce. Their online database contains thousands of companies throughout the produce industry supply chain. You can easily search their database to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com and click Join today. That's producebluebook.com. So we do have Jeff Lair back with us again. We did an episode a couple months back with you, Jeff. Jeff, welcome back. It's great to have you here.
Good to be with you guys again for this episode. It's 191, right?
This is we're at 193 now because we were going to record a couple weeks ago, had some technical difficulties. So 2 weeks later, here we are.
So, and here we are closer to 200th episode and a big celebration in store.
I know, right? You're gonna have to do some fireworks. Ben, actually, it's gonna probably be around the 4th of July, so maybe fireworks are in order. But anyway, Ben, how are you doing today?
Doing well. No complaints. Excited to dig into it.
Yeah. So quick sports recap here. The Preakness, did you guys watch the second leg of the Triple Crown series there? It was
I did not.
National Treasure was the name of the horse that won. So funny story. I was out of town last week, and I had some friends. They were in Rochester. We went to like a racetrack casino there and watched it. So I actually got to watch it in a place where you could bet on horses. So I placed a little bet on horses. I have no idea what I'm doing, but one of the guys there is like, yeah, it's like, what do you want to bet? And I was like, well, I'm going to take the 3 favorite horses, and I want to make a bet where as long as any of the 3 land in any of the top 3 positions, I win. So the guy puts the bet in for me, and the bet hits, and I'm super excited because I called the top 3, and then I go to cash it out, and it says like not a winner, and I realized the guy typed it in wrong. He put like basically they had to be in that order, and he didn't
win,
do
play,
something
show,
called boxing it, which apparently is a thing in horse betting, which I've never heard of.
It's the opposite configures of the numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically I would have had, it would have been 6 total bets with those 3 horses. Instead, I only had the 3 in that exact order. So did not win, but hey, I learned something about horse betting, I guess. Other than that, the PGA Championship was played in Rochester when I was out there. Awful weather the first couple days. Just an absolute.
Did you get to go?
I did not go. Literally, even my friends that were out there, like we were going to golf and they were there, and they left because it was so rainy. It was disgusting. It was cold, wet. Well, I guess it was like 60, but it was just disgustingly wet and pouring everywhere. There's delays on frost on the first day, and then but anyway, Brooks Koepka, Ben, in your words, the most punchable face in golf, or one of the most. He gets his third.
Easy now.
Third.
This is a non-contact sport here.
Yeah, exactly. But it was impressive. Just the way that like the round changed throughout the weekend. And the one guy, you see that like the high school teacher shot a hole in one.
Yeah, I think it was on 15.
Dunked it yesterday or on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So wild, but good overall.
Fun tournament.
Yeah, and you have Brooks Koepka's a live golfer, right? So is he the first live golfer to win a
major? Yeah, a major.
Yeah. Wow.
Which makes everything interesting because now, they're talking about Ryder Cup participants, and if any of the live guys will be on the Ryder Cup, and there's obviously 2 sides of a story there, and so we'll see how everything shakes out here.
Yeah.
The guy editing our next course we're launching, is one of the journalists for Live, and he was up there. I was talking to him last week. I'm anxious to kind of hear his take, because this is exactly what we were talking about. Was what do you think the rest of the season would look like if a Live golfer does win one of the majors this year?
Yeah. Well, time will tell. Let's give a shout out to our friends at DAT, and then we're going to hop right into produce.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the industry. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you'll get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Check out the show notes and show your support for Freight 360. You get a free month if you sign up using the link in the show notes.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado, Jeff, what commodities are we going to take a look at today?
So guys, we're getting into some spring fruit, summer fruit. We're going to kick it off with cherries, and then we're going to look at the combo strawberries and blueberries, because depending on where you are in respective parts of the country, which we'll get into here in specific, the strawberries and blueberries are rolling and rocking in a good way.
So yeah, let's kick it off with cherries. Let's set the stage here. So cherries are currently shipping?
Yeah, cherries are currently coming out of California. And you think about cherries and so California, the southernmost part of the West Coast states, and they actually move up as far as seasonality and availability up to Oregon and Washington. Here in May, well, actually in June, you're going to start to see cherries in Washington State, and they'll be rocking it for the 4th of July weekend holiday. And then Oregon actually starts kicking it off in July. So right now it's California's the leader, and then also Michigan in the Midwest here is going to be rolling with their cherry season. And so we're looking forward to a really strong cherry season here in volume. So just for listeners, where will cherry loads be? Again, California here starting off April, May, Washington in June, Michigan in June, and actually even New York.
I was going to say, because I'm from Buffalo, right? And there's cherry, usually like the summer months. I want to say June, July is like when we tend to see cherries popping up around here. So
okay, from and specifically for you, Nate, for cherry growers in New York State, you're seeing local cherries in your neck of the woods in Buffalo.
I wouldn't say in Buffalo, but more like Finger Lakes region tends to be where they do a lot of like grapes and cherries and stuff like that. There's really, really good soil around the Finger Lakes.
Right. But I guess from a produce department standpoint, are you seeing any New York cherries in your New York produce departments in the retail?
Oh, like as far as availability, like in the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, I'm sure you're getting Washington's, because obviously Washington's a huge shipper of cherries. I think that state produces the most cherries in the nation. But then you've got these other states that we've already mentioned too.
Well, they got the longest season according to Produce Blue Book. I was pulling it up as we were going through it. Washington has a 4-month season. It seems like every other state has 2, at most 3. California, correct. 3, April through June, but correct. Washington, June all the way through September. I mean, they've got a really long growing season, it looks like.
Correct. Yep.
It's probably just based on I feel like Washington never gets like too cold, but also never gets like too hot, right? So they have that really long, like prime season of like summer, right? Which would give them 4 months or so.
Yeah, but they get cold up there too. So it depends. I mean, you talk frost.
I mean, I'm comparing myself to, I guess Buffalo, but I feel like Washington, like Seattle in the wintertime just is like cloudy and rainy. Sure, some frost here and there, but I doubt they're getting single-digit temperatures in December and January. I could be wrong. You go up to the mountains, Mount Rainier, they're definitely cold and there's snow up there. But
yeah, and I'm pretty sure the cherry activity and where the most grower shippers are in higher elevations too, so they can see colder temps as well as freezing. So here's just a couple of things too for your listeners too on this as far as cherries go and opportunities that they can connect with Blue Book Services, our online membership. We publish over 150 grower shippers of cherries in the US and Canada with a 3X or better rating. Okay, so that's 150 plus companies throughout the US and Canada. And then from a buying standpoint, we publish about 185 3X or better buying companies on the cherry commodity. So that's just keep in mind, where can we get these opportunities to pursue loads? That would be right there. We're pushing almost 400.
And is that the highest credit rating? Like what are
So,
you just want to remind the audience of how the structure of the credit rating?
Again, for Blue Book services, companies earn a trade practices rating. That rating's derived and earned from a company sending us confidentially their trade references, customers they deal with on a regular basis, both for sourcing, selling, transporting, fresh fruit and veg, and even supply and service companies, but primarily the transportation and produce side of the supply chain. And these companies then rate that respective company that submitted the trade reference list based on how they do in a business transaction. And as we know, transporting fresh fruit and veg is not the same as a hard good, a piece of steel, piece of plastic, because you're dealing with perishable commodities. And so with that in mind, I think you also have to keep in mind that usually, and we don't want this to happen, but usually something may happen from getting a cherry to a retailer or a wholesaler from Washington State to Chicago, New York, Philly, Miami. And so what does the respective business do, the transportation company do, if there is a problem, and how do they work through that?
Okay.
So the rating is based on, like, do you do what you say and say what you do? In other words, if the broker is going to broker a load from Washington State to New York City, and it's supposed to get there in 5 to 7 days, does that happen? And if it doesn't, then what? And so how do they work through that? Or what happens with the truck? Does it maintain temperature? So there's all these variables that come into transporting fresh fruits and vegetables that a transportation broker, a trucker needs to know and really be versed in.
I was going to ask you about that, Jeff. I mean, I spent some time going through Produce Blue Book, looking into cherries, and again, it gave me some really good insight into how durable they are. And clearly, they're not. It's a very fragile and easily damaged commodity. Are they always shipped in reefers? Because I know it says on the website that they need to be in higher humidities. Is that done through, typically if they try to manage that humidity when they ship, or what are even some things related to, I guess, what we're talking about, just actually shipping them?
Yes, you're starting to ask me some questions that are out of my ballpark in a certain level. I mean, I would think you can maintain humidity to a certain level in that reefer, in that refrigerated trailer. Mm-hmm. And the respective shipper would be aware of that, as well as the transportation company. At least they should be, depending on the
so I'll read it right off the Know Your Commodity section on Produce Blue Book. It says, for storing and packaging, fresh market sweet cherries have a storage life of 2 to 3 weeks at 30 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit and 90 to 95% relative humidity. Fresh market sour cherries have a storage life of 3 to 7 days at 32 degrees Fahrenheit and 90 to 95% relative humidity. I would be willing to bet, and again, I know you're not the expert when it comes to that part of the commodity, but there's probably more time, well, maybe not more. I think about the storage when it gets to where it has to be sold, whether that's a farmer's market or a cold storage facility, or even the grocery store where it might be sold at the retail level. So, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I'd keep it at the retail level primarily, and even food service level. And so, that cold chain is important, and it's critical for that cherry, because it is a pretty fragile commodity that we work through the supply chain and enjoy as consumers. And yet there's a whole lot that needs to be TLC, tender love and care, if you will, from getting that from the orchard there in Washington State or California or Oregon or Michigan or New York to you. And so, and as you can see, you're depending on supply and demand, pound of cherries, depending on when they're being shipped and volume availability, you can pay $5, $6 and up a pound. Mm-hmm. They're not cheap.
And I think, and this is a personal preference, I'm sure this doesn't hold true for every broker out there, obviously, but the more care a shipment needs, because it is, again, either more fragile or more specific or is more susceptible to any damage, the more care the shipper needs to place and who they're going to trust moving it, which means service matters a lot more in a scenario than it does with a hard good like lumber. So when you have products like that, again, if you're the type of broker out there that wants to make a name by doing things the right way, and what you've referenced earlier, doing what you say, saying what you do, putting good quality carriers on it that know how to move these commodities, know what they need to be paying attention to, right? That is just so much more valuable to a customer that can't lose that, right? To your point, it's not a low dollar amount per pound, even when we buy it at the retailer, right? So again, you lose a portion of a truckload. These are large dollar amounts. So they're going to be more picky about who they work with, but that's a good thing. That means you're likely to have better relationships with your customers if you are also doing those things. I think it's just a really good opportunity, kind of hidden in different clothes in some ways.
I would
people look at that and go,
yeah, I would add in too, just for like basic knowledge on this. If you've got a commodity that, and whether it's inflation that causes the value to go up, or it's just a high valued type of produce, if a carrier's standard cargo insurance only covers up to $100,000, you may want to, well, you definitely want to find out what the total value of that shipment is in case it's over $100,000. Because I've seen that happen in like seafood, right? But I've definitely seen it happen with certain kinds of berries as well. So yeah, definitely you don't want to have, or also you don't want to have an exclusion, because some carriers' insurance policies will exclude some of these commodities in the produce realm that have a higher tendency to be susceptible to damage.
And I would say there are definitely brokerages out here that will not allow some of their brokers to move berries for this very same reason. They tend to be higher margin. They tend to be higher risk. There's a definitely, like, you're almost assured if you're going to ship berries all season, you will get claims. Like, it's just part of the industry. And if you don't have the good processes and the people that have the experience that know what to look for, it's a very risky proposition and you end up losing more than you're going to gain. But if it's something where you're looking for an opportunity to make a name for your company or yourself as a broker, spend the time, go into websites, go through Produce Blue Book, learn about these commodities, talk to carriers, ask questions about what you need to be paying attention to when you do these. It's all available out there if you want to be able to pursue something like this. And especially being able to use a tool like Produce Blue Book, it's literally all in one place. You don't have to go to 1,000 different sources to learn these things.
Yeah. So anything else on cherries noteworthy, or think we want to move on to blueberries and strawberries?
That's a wrap on cherries.
But that's a cherry on top.
Enjoy.
Yes.
They're coming soon.
I will say on cherries, I've never been a big cherry guy. I know some people love them. The only time that you'll ever see me ingesting a cherry is if it's in like a Sam Adams cherry wheat. That's
cocktail.
Like the one time I'll have a cherry is if it's in my beer like that. But.
We gotta move the mojo on that for you, Nate.
I love cherries.
All right, so talk to us about blueberries and strawberries. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so let's talk blueberry, strawberry. So let's go up the. So we were on the left coast, right? Cali, Oregon, Washington, and then with blueberries, it's kind of the opposite, but not exactly. As I'm looking here, Cali's been rocking blueberries March, April, May, and they'll be hitting it in June and July, and then they'll be wrapping up their seasonal deal. But for blueberries, the right coast going in Florida and all the way up is starting to really move berries. So if you like blueberries like I do, you're seeing blueberries coming up from Georgia right now, and Florida to a certain degree, but up here in the Midwest, Chicago suburbs, I'm seeing plenty of Georgia berries. I was in Alabama a couple of weeks ago, and they were already down there as well. And then basically blueberries will be running then in the Carolinas in April, or then we'll be hitting East Coast like New Jersey, where I grew up, the Garden State. New Jersey blueberries to me are one of the best. So shout out to any blueberry grower shippers in the state of New Jersey, Michigan. I really enjoy those as well. They'll also be running here, give or take, in May through really October, East Coast. Midwest kicks it in July, goes all the way through October. And then we kind of go back a little bit to the left coast. We got Washington, Oregon, in June, July, and all the way through the fall through October, because they have cooler temps up there. So their season kicks off later than it does on the East Coast. So Texas is also in the mix here, May, June, July. So those are some of the berry areas. Mexico brings up a whole bunch of blueberries too, which you may be seeing in your stores as well right now. And they've been doing it since really the winter, February, and then they almost have like a year-round supply really from Mexico. But I think once the states start really rocking it with the seasonal deals, Mexico takes a little bit of a fade on that, depending on where you're located geographically and the retailers that are sourcing blueberries. But blueberries are a fantastic antioxidant. Hopefully you guys know that. Hopefully you're incorporating in some way, shape, or form into your daily eating. But from a blue book standpoint, we've got 169 grower shippers of blueberries in the U.S. and Canada with 3X or better rating. And then on the buy side, we've got 195 plus buyers with a 3X or better rating in the U.S. and Canada. So that gives you, again, well over 300, give or take, 350 and change of both buyers and sellers of blueberries in U.S. and Canada with a 3X or better rating.
Yeah, there's plenty of opportunities in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things, so I'm looking at blueberries versus strawberries here. It looks like domestically, there's a much, almost year-round, you can find somewhere in the U.S. where strawberries are shipping. Blueberries has a much thinner time frame where there's a lot more import, it looks like, in the winter months. But something, to take away from that, if you're a freight broker, is the seasonality of certain commodities is going to vary from other ones. Like, you'll have some people where if they move avocados, there's a very limited time of the year where they can get avocados domestically versus them coming up through Mexico and South or Central America. Whereas for the case of strawberries, there's somewhere in the U.S. that they are showing on this metric here, or this graph or visual, that they're available somewhere throughout the entire year in the actual domestic U.S. So, again, your specific customer or grower or buyer may have different locations throughout the year, but it is a commodity that you can work on domestically throughout the entire year with strawberries. And blueberries, not the entire year, but you might be working in some of the imported stuff in the winter months. But something worth noting there, whereas cherries was a very much smaller window. I think it was domestically, the earliest was April with California, and then September is the latest in Washington. So that's one of the free tools on Produce Blue Book, is that Know Your Commodity tool. Definitely take a look at that, and you can see a little bit of a calendar on where this stuff comes from at what time of the year.
Seasonal availability, and just I don't know if there's any other industries that transportation serves where it's seasonal. You guys can help me out on that, but these are seasonal availability charts for the calendar year, both domestic that we've primarily talked about here for your listeners, domestic, U.S., and then we go into Canada a little bit too. We've talked about that since they're north of the border here and not too far away, and then Mexico. But there's also international seasonal availability on these respective commodities too, and each of the respective 115 plus fresh fruits and vegetables that are available on the Know Your Commodity Guide have a seasonal availability chart. So, and it's just, the industry calls these availabilities more or less deals. So there's different deals going on throughout the year in different geographical locations where respective fruit or vegetables grown. And obviously that's all based on where they're located, weather, and everything else that goes into that mix. So,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as availability year round, or that's seasonal availability, I've always had in my mind that it was always in the fresh fruit and produce world. There is definitely demand changes on other commodities throughout the year. Like, for example, building materials are not in as high of a demand in the Northeast during the wintertime like they are in the summertime when people are building houses, and construction tends to be, it's construction season up here as soon as the winter's over. So whereas produce, that's a go-to seasonal commodity. Ben, do you know of any other commodity that is seasonal in its availability like that?
Yeah, I mean, some of the other things have seasonal aspects to it, but not as drastic, I think, as produce, right? Like building materials is the obvious one that comes to my mind before you even said it. But even kind of like retail has a seasonality to it where you don't see lots of retail spending in January, February. You tend to see it in the third, fourth quarter. You see container shipping that is more towards, it starts in June and the season picks up all the way through the end of the year and then kind of falls off. But nothing as extreme as I think produce. And which leads me into the point that I was going to make. We got this question last week, I think, on YouTube. And it's a great question. Somebody said, I hear everybody talking about needing to do research before you prospect. And the guy said, but no one ever says what I should actually be researching. And I was like, that is a great question. And I want to give some people some examples of how I answered this. And I answered the question saying that anything you can use in the context of the conversation is applicable research. And this page right here, again, just strawberries alone, just to give an example, I could pick 4 or 5 things without even scrolling down the page that I could use in a conversation, right? One, the seasonality. To be able to understand and just have a conversation with a shipper about when their season starts in relation to the other seasons in the rest of the country. Because guess what? As a shipper, that's what they're watching. When does their season start related to the rest of the country? When are their sales going to pick up? When is their busy season? When does it get slower? But also, it talks a lot about even just like the durability of the fruit. It tells you about the transit temperature, like strawberries should be at like 32 degrees. I mean, there's a half a dozen things just in the Know Your Commodities, like first section that you could read in probably 5 minutes and then use literally in the conversations you're going to have that day with these shippers, right? Just being aware of these things is going to allow you to have better conversations. This is the type of research we've been referring to, right? This is what is helpful to further the conversation, to help you build better rapport, but also to be better at actually moving the good, which is the whole job anyway, right? All of those things are kind of in one place, which is, again, which makes this tool so valuable to anybody looking to get into one of these niches, I think. Or
the other thing too that I like is the pricing part of it. So it breaks down not just the commodity in general, but like strawberries. It's got national average for a 2-pound package. It's got organic national average for a 1-pound package, organic national 2-pound package, and then conventional or national 1-pound conventional. So basically you got like your regular and your organic, and you've got the 1-pound and the 2-pound, and you can see how that fluctuates throughout the year. So for example, the organic 2-pound package from like March was almost twice as expensive as it was 3 months later in May. And this is showing a snapshot from a couple years ago, but still it gives you an idea of how the price can change throughout the year. And that probably is related to the supply of it and where it's coming from. And again, the transportation costs that are involved to get it there.
And you could be certain that that company is well aware of what the price point is when they are going to start shipping their product, right? Like it takes a good amount of time to cultivate, farm these, grow them, but you've got a very limited amount of time to get them out and get them to the stores and get your revenue for it, or it's worth nothing, which is very different than most other commodities.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Here's just a couple things though. 3 R's. First, rates, because we talked about this in the previous episode, but rates on fresh fruit and veg, depending on where it's located and when that deal's, help me out here, when that deal starts, the rate could be low right now in respective state, but then all of a sudden they start shipping and it goes up, correct?
Yep. Because what happens is, and Florida's a great example, as soon as all the citrus starts to ship out of Florida, there's a massive demand to get a truck, right? So it starts to that starting of that season alone single-handedly affects the capacity of available trucks. So they're all getting
the whole state
sucked into that area of the country, which makes them less available further away from that location. So that's absolutely true.
You would see in the bigger brokerage, when I used to work at the bigger brokerage, like, and it wasn't even like it would happen at a certain point, and then the message would go out to the whole company. It would be like, the brokers that shipped a lot of these, like we'll just say citrus in Florida, for instance, you would see emails go around like 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. It would just be like, Florida just flipped, and all of a sudden the rate per mile to go into Florida falls to like $1 a mile, but the rate outbound to Florida jumps up by like double what it was in the morning. And it happens like you kind of know when the season's coming, but when it actually happens and it starts sucking up the trucking capacity, like Nate explained, it shifts the whole market. And it affects the other commodities that don't have anything to do with produce. Like you could be shipping, I don't know, literally anything else in that same type of equipment. And now your rate to get a truck is going to change because the produce growers and shippers are going to absorb as much of that capacity as they can, because the opportunity cost, if they don't ship it, is enormous.
Like, think about like seafood, right? So like Florida with like fishing, right? So like for a great example, Fort Pierce, Florida. It's actually, I get down there a lot. My parents live there. It's historically a big fishing town. So there's massive, I mean, they ship more than just fish there, but there's citrus not too far. I think it's the Sunkist, or one of the big orange juice companies has a facility there. But outside of that, like think about if you're you're shipping fresh fish that can ship year round, and all of a sudden citrus kicks off, and you're like, well, I guess it's that time of year again. They're going to affect my rates the next few months. So, but you're absolutely right. You could be a totally unrelated commodity, but you're still going to be affected by what happens around you in those other seasonal commodities.
Yeah. So thanks for all that on the rate. The second one would be research. Going back to Benjamin's point, and this is where I think Blue Book and seasonality all come together if you connect the dots. Meaning, okay, we've talked cherries, we've talked blueberries, a minute strawberries. What states are the seasonality of that respective berry happening? Now, here's the other thing too you got to keep in mind as a listener, and just even for us as working in the industry. Just because it says here on the seasonality of a respective berry, blueberry or strawberry or cherry, that California is going to be shipping strawberries in March, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen. It could be late March, it could be early April. And so just understanding that in the mix of everything too. And that's basically just doing research, seeing maybe what happened the previous year, but then just because it happened last year doesn't mean it's going to happen this year. You know what I'm saying? And just so connecting that dot. Then use Blue Book online, do a search of grower shippers in California, and then start making some calls, and even making some calls, even if planning for next year.
Absolutely.
Do your homework.
Yep.
And start building relationships. And if you're in New York, where Nate is, hey, maybe because you're in New York, you can actually visit some potential prospects. You don't have to jump on a plane to get to California. And so you're building a relationship face to face on that. They're seeing you, you're seeing them. That's our number two.
Yep.
Our number three, rocket. So you've done the rates, you've done the research. Now make the sale and book the loads and make some hay. So those are my 3 R's for you guys.
I love it. I love the intensity and the enthusiasm behind that too. Rocket. Very good. And to your point on stuff in person, I got to go, me and a broker went to, this is like 5-6 years ago, went to a potato farm in, I don't know, it's in Western New York, probably like an hour from where I live. And it was really cool to see their facility and see just exactly how they harvest everything, where it gets stored, the temperature at which it gets stored, and then actually how it gets loaded and everything like that. So very cool stuff. Definitely worth it if you got something in your area. So, but don't forget those 3 R's from Jeff: your rate, your research, and rocket. So well, we got some good questions here from our listeners. Actually, they're on produce, so that'll be a good Q&A section today. But first, shout out to our friends at Lean Solutions Group. Are you looking to take your freight brokerage or agency to the next level? Look no further than Lean Solutions Group. They're industry leaders in nearshore staffing for logistics companies with offices located in South America, Mexico, and the Philippines. They offer a wide range of exciting positions, including freight broker back office operations, accounting, tech and web development, business development, marketing, customer service, and more. Don't miss out on the opportunity to work with the best in the business. Visit their website at www.leangroup.com to learn more about the exciting solutions they have to offer your brokerage or agency. All right, our first question. This comes from a carrier. The carrier said, why are brokers that move produce so paranoid? They seem to call and message me about details way more than any other loads that I haul. So this kind of brings me back to what we said earlier in the conversation, right? Produce there's a way higher chance of there being a claim or an issue if things are not done properly, right? So you don't have a big margin of error when it comes to the temperature inside of the reefer, or making sure that reefer is actually at the right temperature when they show up there versus, oh, I turned on my unit 20 minutes before I showed up and it's 90 degrees outside. So things like that. Also, the way that it gets loaded, right? You could have, if it's driver assist or anything like that, some of this stuff is very, very fragile and it can be damaged very, very easily. So that's probably your main reason.
And in addition to that, you have your time. Like if you are losing a day or two, that drastically affects the place you're shipping it to's ability to sell it before it goes bad.
Yep.
Again, that is not that relevant when you've got lumber and some other things that can sit there until somebody needs to get it. But when you've only got 5 to 7 days before something is going to be literally worthless,
yeah,
and you are running it, a few days worth of transportation, a truck breaks down, you give up 2 or 3 days, which can happen sometimes, you might have lost a significant portion of that entire load. So there's just much more risk around even the transit time, even if you're doing everything else right.
So like in this driver's scenario, if he's driving a reefer unit, he's going to haul frozen stuff and fresh things that just have to be cool. So think about, for example, like we used to move Talenti gelato. It's gelato. It's like that very sugary ice cream that you'll find in your grocery store. But being frozen, it can sit in cold storage and then on a reefer unit and then in the grocery store for a way longer amount of time than certain produce commodities have from when they're harvested at the farm to when they have to be able to be sold on the shelves. Like to your point, Ben, very, very small time or window of time versus some other commodities in the reefer world. Good stuff. Next question. For anyone that specializes in produce, how do I narrow my search to farms and shippers that work with brokers or find their loads? Because the issue I'm having is there's a lot of them that say that they're customer routed. There's a lot in here, but I think the easiest way, this is a Blue Book episode specifically. If you're a broker that's a member of the Blue Book services, you get a member number, correct, Jeff?
You do, correct.
Yeah, so you can call anyone inside of Blue Book and you have their member number. You can give them your member number. They can look you up. You can look them up, and you guys have a whole lot of information about one another already before you even have a conversation about what their needs and things are. So I would say that's probably the most common and best way that folks will go about trying to find specific farms or fresh food or fruit or produce shippers in that realm specifically.
And Nate, just subscribe to Blue Book Services, and you got everything you need. All your answers to your questions on that listeners' questions are answered and more.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as far as the customer routed part, what they're saying there is, let's say they call a produce broker or a seller, and they're like, oh, we don't actually set up the transportation side. Our customer is the one that does it. It could be true. It could just be an objection. But somebody, whether it's whoever's selling it or buying it, somebody's coordinating the trucking side of that. So, Ben, do you want to add anything on the customer routed piece?
Yeah. Ask, hey, that's great. Who are most of your customers? Who are you shipping to? And then guess who you should call
Who's
next?
on the other end of it? Yeah.
Those people, right?
Yep. Exactly. All right. Last but not least, I'm starting to prospect produce for the first time this year. Coworkers told me that produce is too much of a headache, and I wanted to hear any advice or suggestions. Well, if you've already heard this entire episode, you've gotten a lot of advice right there, but use the information and the tools around you, and don't just skim through it and think you know what you're talking about. It's a really good idea to have, like, for example, the Know Your Commodity tool from Produce Blue Book. Have it up on one of your screens or on your screen when you're on the phone calling a specific prospect, because that way you'll know all the details about that commodity. Where is it shipping from at that time of year? So if you're calling a company that's in Texas and they're not shipping until, a different time of the year, your conversation is going to be much different than if you're trying to get loads covered for them today. They don't have anything for you to move today. So I would say use all the information and knowledge around you. Again, we obviously recommend become a member of Blue Book. I personally am. A lot of great information in there. And we'll have a link in the show notes to make sure that there's a quick, easy way to access the Join Now page. But that's the best thing you can do is use the tools and the resources around you. And Blue Book is clearly doing it in the produce realm specifically. So I don't know anyone else who's got more information on produce than Blue Book.
And I would just say too on that, Nate, just as far as, and I understand that person's question and their concern as far as we hear it's produce is hard and challenging, and it is, from the whole supply chain from point A to point B to you enjoying whatever you're hopefully going to have on your dinner table tonight as far as fruits and vegetables go. And I think a lot of the key is if you're going to do produce on the transportation side, you're going to make a commitment.
Yep.
You are. And you're also going to have to research and learn. And another resource I would say is reach out to some companies that either broker or transport or both fresh fruits and vegetables. Ask them what should they be learning. Ask them how they did it. Ask them the challenges so that they're doing their homework on that front too in their research as they make decisions as far as whether or not they're going to broker loads or transport loads.
Yeah, I would say, like, as on a final thought on it, is produce, in my opinion, is like a niche within a niche. So like you have the fresh fruit and produce world, it's a niche within itself, but each commodity is vastly different in many cases than the other commodity. So you're going to become either an expert in one part of the market and do a very good job at it, or if you try to be a jack of all trades, you're not going to be the top performing broker like somebody at a competing company who spends a lot of time focused in one area. So definitely take your time, make sure you are learning the proper amount. And I wouldn't recommend, if you're brand new to it, I wouldn't try to do like corn and lettuce and strawberries and blueberries and cherries and grapes all at once, right? Start somewhere and start to learn how that commodity specifically is, and then expand yourself out as you get more comfortable. So, but good questions, and we appreciate everyone sending their questions in. Jeff, you got anything you want to wrap up with here, whether it's cherries, blueberries, strawberries, produce, or anything in general?
Just a quick shout out back to strawberries, Nate, because as far as we talked about seasonality of those strawberries, but I did mention grower shippers and the number of grower shippers and sellers, didn't I?
I know cherries we did. I think blueberries we did. What are the ones on strawberries? I think you said there was like 350 for one of them.
Well, so on strawberries, there's over 200 plus companies with a 3X grower shippers of strawberries, more than 200 with a 3X or better rating. On the buy side, it's 310.
Wow.
Buyers. So we're talking over 500 in the US and Canada, 3X or better rating.
We definitely missed that one. So I'm glad we caught it at the end.
Yeah. I thought so too. So that's it. I mean, these are just, to me, fun commodities. I enjoy eating them. I realize they're not necessarily fun to get everything grown and harvested. There's a lot of sweat, a lot of labor, a lot of late nights, early mornings to get it from point A to point B. But these are delicious fruits that I love to have in their seasonal form, which is, to me, the best.
Definitely. Well, good stuff. Ben, any final thoughts on your end?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.